in the early days, my friends, he was human headshot machine. You understand this?
In his prime, one player stood out in Counterstrike as having one of the most unique playstyles. One that would leave you in a state of shock when it was working, and in a state of confusion when it wasn't. Few players had the ability to have their name echo across the gaming world. Regardless of if you played CS, chances are you've heard of ScreaM and his pinpoint precision. The self-proclaimed headshot machine, ScreaM was one of the most satisfying players to watch in his prime. But his lack of sustained success makes his career one that is hard to understand just how good he was. Now that he is retired from professional Counter-Strike, let's take a look back at his career to find out just how good he was. The beginning of CSGO was a proving ground for ScreaM. 19 at the time, ScreaM was proving that he cannot be underestimated among a field of vintage CS stars. ScreaM would have a part of the much fabled VariGames roster, one that featured the biggest names in French Counter-Strike. However, it was the young Belgian that proved that he was just as good as these legends, if not better. Alongside stars like NBK and Kenny S, it was no surprise that ScreaM and VariGames found enormous success early on. In the year of 2013, ScreaM had 10 out of 12 events with a rating above a 1.6. His consistency was impeccable, and provided VariGames with a star player to run alongside Kenny S or Shox. As is well known by now, VariGames as a team were never really able to get over the hurdle of NIP. But to be fair, nobody could. They were still able to win 4 big LAN events, Mad Catz Birmingham, Starlighter 7 Finals, and 2 Raid Call EMS events. ScreaM was a staple in all of those victories. Surrounded by a group of veteran players who were in their prime, ScreaM had no pressure on him. He could just do what he did best: decapitate people.
Optimistic opening for the round. Very positive. Oh, there it is. Oh, again!
For the year of 2013, he had an insane 75% headshot ratio, almost 20% better than anybody else. He was sublime in clutch situations, and was a player VariGames could rely on in most games. Yeah, his consistency wasn't the greatest, but he was still rated the 7th best player of 2013 by HLTV. The year of 2013 proved that ScreaM had what it took to be one of the world's best riflers. You began to ask yourself, why can't he follow in the footsteps of other legends such as Shox and RPK? The sky was the ceiling for this Belgian star. In early 2014, VariGames had been bought out by a Singaporean organization called Titan. Titan came into the year with massive expectations. Now that ScreaM had proven what he could be, he was facing enormous pressure to continue the great run of form that he had been on. Unfortunately, the year of 2014 for ScreaM raised some alarm bells for fans across the game. He started the year with 2 abysmal performances at LAN, with back-to-back .91 HLTV ratings, despite his team being finalists in both events. Then came ESL 1 Katowice. This was the major that Titan had to perform at. Unfortunately, Titan bombed out of the major in embarrassing fashion, losing to Hellraisers in a decider match.
Doze is sitting inside a pit, and Titans have fallen! The Titans are getting knocked out of Group A and are not advancing on. We are going to see Virtus Pro and Hellraisers advance out of Group A. Who the hell would have thought Titans wouldn't have been here?
I'm lost for words.
However, for ScreaM, this was a good showing. He was clearly Titan's 2nd best player behind Shox, and showed real positive signs that 2013 wasn't just a fluke. ScreaM began to heat up as he entered the summer months of 2014. He would dominate Copenhagen games with an outstanding 1.39 rating, 5th best across the entire event. Titan then moved on to Star Series 9 Finals, where once again ScreaM proved that he could dominate against the world's best teams. He thrashed VP and Na'Vi in his first 2 matches, before disappearing against the great NIP squad. At DreamHack Summer, ScreaM disappeared, and began to show some real warning signs for Titan. In 6 maps, he was just pedestrian, with just a .97 rating. once again he failed to show up against NIP, which led to Titan's early dismissal in the event. He would bounce back at his next event at GFIN 83, where he went on a tear against top competition. He would have a streak of a 1.25 rating or above in 5 straight maps, including lights out performances against Fnatic and iBuyPower. However, when it mattered most, ScreaM disappeared for Titan. At ESL 1 Cologne, they had to perform, otherwise roster changes were inevitable. ScreaM would have to find his consistency to save his job. And unfortunately, the opposite occurred. ScreaM was nowhere to be found in Cologne. He was the epitome of mediocre. In a nail-biter against Cloud9, ScreaM failing to show up might have been the difference maker in an overtime loss. And in the deciding match against Dignitas, he completely vanished. Only 8 kills in an awful 16-1 loss. Titan left the event embarrassed, and new changes had to be made. ScreaM was replaced on Titan in a move that left the young 20-year-old pondering retirement. Fortunately, he decided to stick around and joined Epsilon later that year. Epsilon would struggle despite ScreaM playing like a star. He only played in 1 LAN in 6 months to close the year. 2014 was a disappointing year for ScreaM. He could not build on his early success in CSGO and could not find consistency throughout the year, something that would become a trend for the Belgian star later on. He was the victim of the French shuffle, and was clearly the best player not on one of the 2 top French squads. However, at just 20 years old, it was hard to lose hope on this player. He was still a headshot machine and a clinic to watch when he was feeling it. But 2014 really left us wanting more. Just when things seemed gloomy for ScreaM, somehow things got worse. His Epsilon teammates were outed as match fixers, and this led to them being banned by Valve. Epsilon had no need for ScreaM anymore and released him from the roster. ScreaM would not find a team for quite some time, but his fortunes changed in May when he was announced that he was forming the first real international super team in CSGO. Under the Kinguin banner, ScreaM was a superstar on a team with many big names. For the first time in nearly a year, ScreaM was on a top team that should compete. In reality though, Kinguin were pretty mediocre, and failed to qualify for many of the big events. In the ones that they did qualify for, they were usually a middle-of-the-pack team, and ScreaM wasn't the star that we hoped he would be. His consistency would waver as he would never string more than 2 positive events in a row for Kinguin. At ESL Cologne 2015, he was able to perform when it mattered most. In the group elimination match, he had a 23-16 game, keeping Kinguin alive, and in the decider match, he was the X factor for Kinguin against a favored Cloud9. ScreaM was headed to the playoffs of a major once again. After nearly retiring a year earlier, this must have felt amazing. The Kinguin players were later signed to G2, where ScreaM would only play 1 event before being poached by Titan once again. His team looks much different than the Titan that discarded him in 2014. ScreaM was brought in to be the clear second star behind Shox. If he couldn't find his consistency, there was no chance for this Titan squad to succeed. Luckily for Titan, the shift back to a French-speaking squad seemed to rejuvenate ScreaM, and he had his best tournament of the year at the major qualifier. He was electric in his first event back in blue, and Titan showed glimpses of their potential as they easily qualified in first place. But once again, his inconsistency would catch up to him. At the major's main event, ScreaM would arguably have his most disappointing event ever. Titan would start off the event with a shocking win over NIP, and ScreaM was the main reason why. However, the drop-off was insane for Titan and ScreaM. In the next 3 matches, ScreaM had ratings below 0.5 twice. Titan would barely be competitive in these matches, and the large reason why was ScreaM not being able to find any consistency. He wasn't the second star that Titan needed. After 2 years of disappointing consistency, ScreaM had now built up a reputation. He was a flashy player who could not be relied upon. It was going to take some hard work for ScreaM to change that narrative around him, and in 2016, he was able to do just that. For ScreaM, 2016 was the light at the end of the tunnel, after all the hard work and bad hands he'd been dealt. After G2 signed the former Titan roster, things turned around for the Belgian star. For the first quarter of the year, G2 and ScreaM were still the inconsistent mess that they always were. ScreaM began the year with a fantastic GEC 2016, where he topped the leaderboards for G2. Fortunately, he could not build any momentum after this event. He struggled mightily at the next major, MLG Columbus. In 5 maps, he would only have a positive KD ratio in 1. ScreaM and G2 bombed out once again at the major. And for ScreaM, this was a continuation of a larger warning sign. He had now performed terribly at 4 straight majors, and was quickly earning the reputation of someone who could not be relied upon in the biggest moments. Things seemingly couldn't go worse for ScreaM, as after the major, he had an awful showing at DreamHack Malmo. ScreaM finished the event with the 4th worst rating out of any player. However, out of nowhere, his story would change. The Belgian would electrify Counterstrike for the rest of 2016, starting at ESL Pro League Season 3 Finals. In a Cinderella run of sorts, G2 would make a Grand Finals run. In the lead up, ScreaM dominated the likes of Optic Gaming and Fnatic, putting up vintage performances. When we got to the finals, against major winners Luminosity, ScreaM showed why everybody was salivating about his potential just a few years ago. In a statement best of 5 series, ScreaM had 4 maps where he just simply dominated Luminosity, including 2 30 bombs back to back. His team, however, would fall short of the trophy, losing in overtime on a map 5. But ScreaM won his first EVP performance for the year, and for the first time in many years, had shown on the biggest stage that he was the real deal once again. He needed to continue this run of form, to truly cement his place among the best riflers in Counter-Strike once again. Consistency was his main weakness throughout his career. However, in 2016, something clicked. As for the rest of the year, he didn't fail to reach a rating below 1.06 in any of his remaining 12 events. At ECS Season 1, ScreaM had his best event of all time.
Behind the crate, the first round comes in, bides his time. First shot connected, one more player, that's all he needs to find. ScreaM gets the headshot though, 1-on-1 for him. Looking for that 1 versus 1, the next one. Against 3W, he's got 15 seconds to play with, but he's just gonna go for it!
After losing the opening match against Liquid, ScreaM and G2 did not look back, winning 8 of 9 matches on their way to the trophy. ScreaM finished the event with 9 straight matches above a 1.17 rating. In the playoffs, he trounced Fnatic and had 2 remarkable performances. In a Grand Finals rematch against Luminosity, ScreaM once again showed up in full force. He dropped 26 kills on the opening map of Dust 2 and had an 18-9 scoreline on the second map. He won his first and only MVP of his career with an insane 1.4 rating across the tournament. ScreaM proved that he had what it took to be the best player on a championship-winning team. Individually, this was ScreaM at his peak, and he was a scary sight for anybody in the server. He was simply one of the most exciting players in the game. As ScreaM found his consistency, G2 did not. They would bomb out at what should have been a deep run at ESL 1 Cologne, and for the rest of the year, G2 would fall back in the middle of the pack. ScreaM, however, was still maintaining his form at every event to round out 2016, including standout events at E-League Season 2 and Epicenter. In 2016, ScreaM fulfilled his potential that he had ridden all over him for many years. He was one of the best fraggers in Counter-Strike, and of course, was a headshot machine, as he had an astounding 65% headshot percentage for the year. HLTV rated him the 9th best player of the year, which would be his career best. 2017 would be the beginning of the end for ScreaM's peak as a player. It began with an awful showing at the E-League Major. This would be a continuation of a worrying trend for ScreaM, as he never had a single standout performance at any of the 8 majors he attended. G2 bombed out of the major in second to last place, and changes were coming. Another French shuffle had commenced, and just like in 2014, he was the player who was left on the outside. G2 signed the French super team, while ScreaM looked like he might just end up with a top 10 team anyways, as reports indicated that he would join FaZe Clan. However, ScreaM might just be the unluckiest player ever, as FaZe decided at the final moment to head in a different direction, signing Nico from Mousesports. This meant that ScreaM was left for scraps, and he decided to build his own squad, with other French players left out of the French shuffle. Many expected this team to struggle, however at their first big event at ESL Pro League, Envy shocked Counterstrike by making the playoffs. This was largely due to the fact that ScreaM turned back the clock and entered God mode against Cloud9 and Immortals, with ScreaM decimating both teams. Envy would struggle to find any form in the coming months, and ended up stabilizing in the mid-20s of the HLTV rankings. ScreaM would continue to show that he was too good of a player to be wasted on a tier 2 team. He would dominate the smaller lands like the DreamHack Opens. Specifically at DreamHack Open Atlanta, he would win his first trophy in a calendar year, albeit a smaller one. However, he was dominant in Envy's run to the trophy with a grand final stomp of Heroic, where ScreaM had an insane 62-37 scoreline. The trend would continue for ScreaM and Envy. They would both perform admirably at smaller events, however at the bigger lands, Envy as a team would crumble, while ScreaM would play well enough to feel bad for the guy. He ended the year with a great stretch of form, with 5 straight lands above a 1.1 rating. But overall, 2017 was the final year that ScreaM could be considered one of the best riflers in Counterstrike. He was dominant against lower tier teams while still being above average against top 20 squads. After this year, ScreaM's career began to falter. He was on Envious until the fall of 2018, however they were not good enough to qualify for many lands. And the lands that they did qualify for, they bombed out almost every time. ScreaM, for his part, was starting to become equally as inconsistent. In 2018 he only had one standout event, where he was a god and willed his team into the semifinals. However, for the rest of the year, he did not have a single meaningful land above a 1 rating. The writing was on the wall now. ScreaM would never be the superstar that he was just a few years ago. He would bounce around at the end of his career. However, after 2018, he never played a single notable LAN event. He was primarily playing in online tier 3 cups, and even in those events, ScreaM began to be a middle of the pack player. The legendary player would retire in 2018 and move his focus over to Riot's Counter-Strike competitor, Valorant, leaving behind a legacy of being one of Counter-Strike's most electrifying players at their peak. ScreaM's career will be defined by his lack of team success and big game success. For as skilled as he was, he never got to the heights as other skilled riflers did. 2016 was the peak of his career, and showed what he could do if he was on a great team. That makes the fact that he was rarely on a team of that caliber so sad. If he was included in some of the bigger teams during the French shuffles, he may have been able to prove himself as one of Counter-Strike's best players ever. He was clearly one of Counter-Strike's most skilled players, however his style of aiming did catch a lot of slack by a lot of pundits across CS. Overall, ScreaM's career may be slightly overrated compared to his length of peak and overall achievements. He only won 6 trophies and only one after 2014. Additionally, he only won 1 MVP in his career. And unlike many of Counter-Strike's great players, ScreaM did not perform well at the 8 majors he played in. Because of these factors, ScreaM gets a career rating of an 80 out of 100. When he was good, he was great, but when he wasn't, he left you wanting much more.